So I'm going to talk about reasonable adjustments and asking about them. And I've put my email address on this slide because I'm always happy for people to email me and ask questions, or if you just want some help with some research articles, if you want pointing in the right direction, I'm always happy to do that. And also I will just say the Maternity on Autism Research Group also has a lot of research on their website, so do feel free to reach out, and my email address is on the last slide as well. So I just thought it might be useful to go through what reasonable adjustments might be, just in case somebody is not aware of them. And just before I start, like a word of caution about this slide, I am using the language set out in the guidance. I'm not assuming that everyone will identify as being disabled, and obviously everyone's individual. And I know that, like as Aimee said, it's often being autistic and being in a certain environment that actually is disabling and becomes a barrier to accessing care. So the language here is, it as set out in the guidance, not my personal view. So the Equality Act 2010 states that all organisations, including health and social care, such as hospitals and GP surgeries, must take steps to remove barriers that individuals face because of a disability. And the NHS must make it as easy for disabled people to use health services as it is for people who are not disabled. So any changes that you request or that your healthcare providers make for you to access the environment are called reasonable adjustments. So you can request reasonable adjustments at any point to enable you to access the care environment, or obviously the healthcare professional can recommend adjustments too as you go along, throughout your pregnancy journey. So if you're thinking of reasonable adjustments, then there are plans specific to the birth environment and pregnancy, and a little bit on postnatal care online on the Marge website. And the ones here were created by me and Alexis Quinn, both of which are available on the Marge website. And Alexis and I have just collaborated on a newer digital version, which should be released next year. However, you don't need any sort of, you don't need any of these plans to request reasonable adjustments. But these plans could, give you an idea of what things that you can request and things, to think about, as well as, things in Aimee's book can lead you to, thinking about what adjustments you might want, what you might need. So once you know which adjustments you might need, then having them documented in a plan of some sort, which is shared with everyone involved in your care, is quite essential. So you might look at these passports and think, actually, I need some adjustments for my maternity appointments. And then if the midwife writes that in your maternity notes, then that will ensure that everyone in your care is aware of those reasonable adjustments. You don't need a specific reasonable adjustments plan. So I thought about, like, how do you even know if you need adjustments? Like, if you've never accessed care spaces such as clinics or children's centres or hospital areas or wards before, then you might not have even thought about reasonable adjustments until you're actually in those spaces, or until that space is so uncomfortable and disabling that actually it becomes a barrier to your care. So what I would recommend is looking at how you interact with certain spaces in your day-to-day life now. So, are there places that you avoid going to? And if so, why? Like, what is it about that space that makes it difficult for you to go there? And autistic people have identified certain things that make accessing care difficult, such as sensory challenges, as Di and Aimee have alluded to. So sensory challenges like, certain smells, noises, lights, temperature, being touched, or not being able to eat and drink in certain environments. So and we're gonna look at some of these things throughout like my presentation, but also executive functioning has been identified as something that can be difficult in different environments, because some people need a quiet space to think and process information. So if you're in a very noisy area, it might be difficult to process information. So I'm going to focus on some of these things now, just to give you an idea of how reasonable adjustments can help. So as Di said, during your pregnancy, or at least your first pregnancy, you will see a midwife quite regularly throughout your pregnancy, from 8 to 10 weeks right up until 42 weeks. And these appointments often take place in a healthcare centre, or a children's centre, or a local clinic, or they might take place at the hospital. And then you'll usually go to your local hospital for your scans. And then, when you're thinking about birth, you might choose to give birth to your baby at home, or in a local midwifery-led unit, or a consultant-led hospital unit, like depending on your pathway of care. And then after you've given birth, you may spend some time in a postnatal ward in the hospital, and you'll also be visited by midwives at home, and then you may also visit them in a clinic as well. So actually there may be a lot of new environments that you've never been to before, or a lot of care spaces that will require you to navigate them. And so it's important to think about these spaces and what adjustments you might need. So thinking about executive function, I don't know whether to go through this, because I've just heard that Rebecca is going to talk about executive functioning. I just wanted to talk about executive functioning in an ability to plan way, so organise time, make decisions, adapt to new situations. And it's actually about how we manage our thoughts and our emotions in relation to those places and different times. But what I thought about was maybe think about how you'll actually get to these care spaces. So if your midwife appointment is in a local clinic, what steps do you need to do to actually get there? And this is quite important for me, because I get lost everywhere I go, and if I get lost once, I will never actually remember how I got somewhere. And I'm also not great at getting up in the morning, and if a car journey takes me 30 minutes, I leave 30 minutes before I need to be somewhere, and don't account for getting lost or being stuck in traffic or parking. And so when I get to places, I'm often like quite stressed and upset sometimes, and like unable to process information. So it'd be worth thinking about, how are you going to get there if this is something that you struggle with. And obviously some people are like, they have like inbuilt sat navs in their brain and can just find their way about. But if you struggle like me, then you might think about, is there a particular time of day where you function better? So for me, that would be in the afternoon, or perhaps you could do a practice drive there on another day to find where the place is, although that wouldn't work for me. I would request a map as well of the building, like to try and find my way about. This doesn't always work for me because I'm not that great at reading maps either. But where possible, I might ask my husband to actually take me to places to take away that stress. So it might be worth thinking, okay, is there somebody that could actually drive me there, or come to this place with me? So you could ask yourself, do I need some help to get here? And actually there's a good website called Accessible, which has lots of UK, so for people outside the UK it won't be applicable, but it has lots of hospitals from around the UK on there, and you can click on your hospital. So if my local hospital's Ipswich, so I would click on Ipswich Hospital, I would click on the antenatal care or antenatal clinic. It shows like the car parks and the where the reception is and how to get to these particular wards. So actually something like that is really good. And actually some hospitals actually have online video tours, so you can click online and actually have a visual tour of the ward. So that might be something that will be helpful. And when accessing environments, it's also important to think about whether you're a sensory seeker, so someone who likes having hugs and likes tactile sensation, or enjoys being in busy places with background noises, or consider whether you're someone who's a sensory avoider, so you might find touch uncomfortable. You might are you someone who needs to be in a quiet area when hearing information so you can process what you're being told? But most of us are a mixture of sensory seeking or sensory avoiding. So it's about, knowing what you like. I personally love hugs and I love tactile sensations. I have this wheat bag always on my desk because I'm always playing with it. But I know my daughter genuinely finds hugs like quite painful. So think about what your sensory, what's positive for your senses and what's not so positive, and then try and think about this in relation to an environment. So if you're sensitive to strong smells, you might want to wear a mask if you go into appointments, because hospitals or care spaces often use quite strong disinfectants. And if you're, sensitive to hypersensitive to smells, that might be something that you might find difficult. Perhaps if you don't like to be touched, then you can request that your midwife, asks your permission every time they want to touch you. So perhaps if they want to take your blood pressure, can they just, ask your permission before going to put the cuff on? And if you're sensitive to bright lights, then perhaps you could wear sunglasses or tinted lenses, or ask for the lights to be turned down, like before your appointment, as a reasonable adjustment. It'll also be good to think about what things like bring you sensory joy or help to regulate you, or, that you feel, I don't know, contented when you do. So for me, I have like smooth stones in my pockets, and sometimes just like fiddling with a receipt in my pocket is actually really regulating. And I always wear rings because I twist them. And so think about, well, actually, like Di said, what actually do you enjoy sensory wise? Because, if you're waiting in a waiting room, then those things can actually help you regulate. And
Sharon, could I just
yeah,
ask you to bring this to a close, because we've
God,
run over a little bit.
Okay, fine. Yeah,
If we could
okay.
have one more minute, and then we'll need to move
Okay,
on.
so I will share these slides, and it would be good to think about like your communication needs. Are there any adjustments to your communication or how you receive information? And the last thing I will say is consider postnatal planning. So a lot of women put a lot of emphasis on their pregnancy and birth, but don't really plan for the postnatal period. So it would be really useful to start planning for the postnatal period. How will you, what support will you have to care for a baby? Do you need to go to antenatal classes, one-to-one classes during pregnancy to help you prepare for feeding and changing a baby? And also think about those sensory challenges as well, for as well in the postnatal period, and also if reasonable adjustments, if you find that they're really difficult to obtain and they're not being honoured, then you can reach out to the local learning disability and autism liaison nurse. Every trust should have one. And birth rights is really good as well for helping you with reasonable adjustments and your rights to reasonable adjustments. And all hospitals have a patient advice and liaison service as well, and it shouldn't happen, but if it does, then there is support available.